Before we proceed with the review, I do have a correction to my previous video. Viewers alerted me to the fact that I had missed that Mary's phone call at the start of the show was in search of her mom. So Deanna Campbell was officially mentioned in the show. Thus, my prior complaint is rescinded, and any quibbles I have about her execution in this show will be saved for later. So last week's episode, even better than I thought. On to this episode. So the Winchesters finally get around to fighting a pagan god, and then a bunch of other stuff happens for no real reason because the writer of this episode apparently turned everything in at the very last minute. This is what I call a nibble to death by ducks episode, where it's not so much any one big massive thing that tanked the story, but a ton of little annoyances that just keep rubbing a raw nerve over and over until you just can't stand the whole thing. And yes, I not only watched this episode twice, but I got the transcript pulled up right here as well. So rather than trying to snip out images with the closed captioning, I'm going to be putting the lines directly on an image on screen because when spoken, it can be easy to miss how bad some of these lines are. Okay, first of all, you know what's a big, massive book of pre-Christian lore? The Old Testament. Are we to believe these old white men just carried half Bibles around? I mean, I'm not even going to get into a long rant about writing and how much lore we have nowadays because of Christian and Muslim monks preserving things, because my editors have told me to keep these videos to under an hour. But I will note that the book they find is on the Celtiberians, a people from Spain. Spain, as you may have forgotten, is in Europe. Europe is where white people come from. So we're told that a bunch of old white dudes have no interest in ancient, really old white dudes? That doesn't even make sense as a bigoted slur. Then, there is the simple fact that being, quote, pre-Christian means that it's over 2,000 years old. We barely have anything from before then because, now try to sit down for this, 2,000 years is a long-ass time, and things tend to get lost over the ages. Here, let me give you some perspective. Per the background, Henry Winchester vanished in 1958. This is when Abaddon wiped out all the men of letters, supposedly. Okay, so the Dead Sea Scrolls, those were first discovered in 1946, just 12 years before, with more being found in 1956. The first publication of those scrolls was published from 1955 all the way up to 2009. Or let's take the Ugaritic tablet text found in Syria. Yes, the initial ones were discovered in 1928. Do you know when a second library of tablets were discovered? 1958. Then 120 additional tablets were found in 1973. 300 more tablets were uncovered in 1994. Hey, how about something relevant to the episode? The Celtiberian city of Timers, however you pronounce it. The archaeology dig of it begun in 1975. Since then, they've excavated an estimated 3% of the city. Like, oh gee, I am so sorry the men of letters didn't have lore that hadn't been discovered yet. Hey, you know what could be a great plot thread? What if so many of those archaeology digs and discoveries from that time were men of letters' efforts to uncover and locate more lore? Wouldn't that be interesting? But no, the show can't give us a line about discoveries and findings made since this place was abandoned. It's got to be some dumb line about old men and pre-Christianity, which, if there's nothing pre-Christian in there, how do we know about the Akrita? I hope shooting your own ark in the foot was worth it. No, I don't want to say anything just yet. I want you to soak this in. Yes, you are not enough, but you might be enough. That is an incredibly dumb, self-contradictory line. I would give any writer a failing grade for writing. Whatever idea you're hoping to convey, start over and write it again. And hey, what about Carlos over there? He's a soldier and hunter too. And why not? Why can't both of them be addressed by this pagan god here? And how awesome would that action sequence have been, seeing these two bros teaming up to fight our villain? It could have added a whole new layer to the relationship between those two guys and really expanded the world. Hold on a sec. We need to jump ahead a bit in order for this to make sense as a failure. Do you see it? Here, let me zoom in. See that? Here's a hint. If someone says, draw first blood, what do you think the rule is? If I explained nothing else to you about what the rules of a duel are, save draw first blood, what do you think the main rule of the whole thing is? Exactly. The first participant to bleed is the one who loses. First blood has been drawn. The fight should be over. Also, this whole line doesn't even make sense because none of it happens later. First blood has been drawn, but not by John. The god, who I'm just going to call Nito, offers to have John join him anyway. This isn't a sentence or thought. It's a randomized word generator. Heck, what prevents John from joining the guy long enough for Carlos to go free and then immediately putting in his 2-week notice? Not to mention that if Nito here wanted recruits, why was he bothering just regular soldiers who, quote, aren't strong enough? Why didn't he just go looking for hunter-soldier combinations? If you want to reply, well, he didn't know the recruits were not hunters, I have to ask, how did he discover that John was a hunter? There's no conversation or scene where this factoid was uncovered. If the god had some kind of, quote, higher sight that could tell him things about a person, then why bother wasting time with regular soldiers instead of seeking out the combination of soldier-hunter? This entire episode is filled with these self-defeating questions and answers. So, you know there's a reason humans stopped using sharpened wood as a weapon and started putting metal tips at the end instead, right? That reason was often because the enemy was wearing metal armor. But no, apparently for the writers, all that metal was just holding the wood back. And if you really wanted to kill someone, forget that sharpened, forged, high tensile strength metal. Good old-fashioned, jagged, irregular stick is where it's at. Well, I am fine with the theory or concept of Millie getting a badass moment here. This was cringe. And it made no sense. What is the hospital on lockdown for? They say an, quote, unforeseen emergency, but what's that emergency? It can't be because of the missing corpse, because the doctor ordering the lockdown didn't know about that missing corpse until the nurse came down and told him within earshot of our main characters there. Meaning he didn't know about the patient until after the lockdown was ordered. So is this lockdown because Carlos and John are missing? How do they know? The lockdown order literally only makes sense if you assume the doctor is aware of things happening from the perspective of the audience. It makes no sense from his perspective as a character within the story and that world. And that's what drives me bonkers this episode. Don't get me wrong, I'm a sucker for veteran-related stuff. Both my grandfathers were in the Navy. I have friends and family serving right this very minute at time of recording. But almost nothing makes sense in this episode except from the perspective of the audience, not from the perspective of characters inside their own world. And then there's just so many missed opportunities in this episode as well. Like, I know the military branches are infamous for a bit of rivalry between the services. So why not just give us a taste of that in this episode? You could have John and Carlos give each other nicknames and then set up a new meme like the classic bitch jerk from the original. Just imagine, hey, try to keep up, you swabby. I don't take orders from no jarhead. Then later on, you have them both fight the god together. And then at the end of the episode, you have a moment like, hey, thanks for saving my ass back there, jarhead. I couldn't have done it without you, swabby. Okay, I don't know what nicknames you'd use. I definitely phone up some service friends and ask them, but the idea is to give these two characters a little bit of an arc between them and set up something you can have going forward. And yes, I know both of these guys technically had an arc, but the key problem is that they had separate arcs. You could have put either one of them completely alone in this situation, and it would have largely played out the same. When you have an ensemble show, you need to keep in mind the opportunities any particular pairings of characters give you. You need to ask yourself, what moments, what arcs can I do between these two people that I can't do when they are with anybody else? Otherwise, you don't have characters. You just have interchangeable widgets. I'm also kind of bored with the whole God faking his own death thing. I think it would have been more interesting to reveal that this Nito guy assumed the face or form of whoever he last defeated. Then at least we'd have more of a reason as to why John doesn't want to join him, because it would be giving up his body or whatever. Instead, we get our characters just turning down and throwing away a potential ally against the Akrita because, I mean, I can invent reasons and justifications for why our Scooby Gang doesn't want to team up with this pagan god, but it would have been really gratifying to actually have heard a reason from our characters. Heck, maybe we could have even gotten a bit of insight and some interesting debates if some thought we should team up and some disagree. That could have actually been an interesting moment in this episode. The whole bit with Maggie just feels flat and artificial. I mean, I'll fully admit it's hard to integrate a backstory into a new story world in a way that can make it feel organic. One of the methods is to give hints and setups long before the payoff. In this case, we probably should have heard about Maggie's off-limits room back in episode 103 when the neighbor kid was staying, but instead it all just feels like it comes out of nowhere. And then they just find the book and instantly flip to the right page and find the solution. The show didn't even try to give a fig leaf of how much time and effort that would take. It's not like this is a completely awful episode. There's a core of a good idea here, and the actors were given some great moments to exercise their chops. Again, it all just feels like they were rushing to get to those moments without ever pausing to think about whether the journey from one to the other made any sense. Mary's love triangle did return and get a name this episode. I'm still feeling like he's going to turn out to be the equivalent of Meg, but this episode did get me to doubt that a little bit. Again, not completely awful, but it's just not a very great episode either. I'm putting this at 2 salt shells out of 5, but it barely squeaks out that score. In a worse mood, I could easily make this a 1. I'm really hoping next week is an improvement.